Today, we're going to talk about breathing like this. It's the Wim Hof method for sleep apnea. Sorry that I demonstrated it, but the reason we're talking about this is because oftentimes you guys will ask in the comments that is the Wim Hof method, which I'll break that down in a moment. Is it good for sleep apnea? Because it's in the category of breathing exercises, right? And I talk about breathing exercises for sleep apnea and all those different things. So it must be helpful, especially because you get to go hang out in a glacier or in a cold shower, which that's a very strong shower. And there's been a lot of great things shown about going into the cold. It reduces inflammation, which is a big part of sleep apnea, corrects breathing patterns or, modulates them. More details on that in a bit. That's why the question is it going to be helpful? But the bigger question we should ask, could it cause more harm than good? Because when we don't understand how something actually works, it just becomes this black box of unknown operations in the middle, we could end up causing some issues. That's why in this episode, I want to talk about Wim Hof for sleep apnea, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and more specifically covering what is it a good idea for sleep apnea, and what could you do that would be even better, whether it's optimizing or changing some things about the Wim Hof method. And of course, this is for educational purposes only. Always talk to your healthcare provider before changing anything. Read the disclaimer on screen for everything else. And of course, click the subscribe button so you stay up to date to the latest and greatest things and also help us get this message out to others. So make sure you go ahead and please subscribe. So the Wim Hof, I have no idea how to say it. I'm not from, is he Norwegian? I forget. Well, someone will correct me in the comments, I'm sure. But it's what I was somewhat demonstrating earlier, where you take these rapid, somewhat deep breaths, and then you do a full max breath hold, and then you hold that for some time, and then you do another sort of recovery breath, etc. We're not going to do that together here because I don't know what you're doing, and this is something you should not attempt. And this is something that can be a little bit dangerous if you don't have full, thorough instruction on it. So do not take my 20-second explanation of this as thorough instruction. It's not on this breathing method. But what's more important to know is how the Wim Hof method, even adding an extra F to the man's name. I'm all over the place on that one. So we want to know what's going on with oxygen and CO2 particularly, because that's going to dictate and let us know, well, how is that actually beneficial or harmful for obstructive sleep apnea? So I'll walk you through. Hopefully you can see my cursor on the screen. So when you start doing your huffing and your huffing and your puffing here, your CO2 levels will go down. So when you hyperventilate like that, you're going to be blowing off CO2. You are not increasing your oxygen levels. I'll talk about that in a moment. I know he says that, or other people say that. That's not how that works. Okay. So CO2 levels go down when you hyperventilate. Great. And then you have this breath hold. And then as you do this, CO2 levels will skyrocket back up and oxygen levels will go down at the same time. It will cause hypoxia. Fancy word for us. That's important later. Lower oxygen. And then you breathe again. Okay, somewhere in here, and then CO2 levels would go back down. We graph this out, and then O2 levels would rise again. CO2, carbon dioxide, oxygen, O2, tomato, tomato. So the basic flow of this is hyperventilate. You make CO2 levels low, hold your breath, then CO2 levels go high, O2 levels go down. So even simpler here, you go from normal oxygen and low CO2 to low oxygen and high CO2. And you just pretty much cycle back in between these two states. That's the whole premise of it. And when you do this, it causes changes in blood flow, which people feel is good, or can also modulate your nervous system in a good way as well. But more on this of how it connects to sleep apnea. There's a quick detour here, because again, people say this all the time. You hyperventilate, you get more oxygen to the body. That's actually not true. So in this research, they looked at what is the impact of hyperventilating on your oxygen levels. Well, as you can see here, there's really no difference. I don't even need to tell you that there's two groups here. They're exactly the same. And what they found further in this study is that if you do this hyperventilation pattern, it does actually allow you to go to deeper levels of hypoxia, but definitely not over oxygenating. I want to make that clear. Okay, a lot of people get that incorrect. Back to breathing and why it can be helpful in this manner here. So when you do this, this is actually a study on the Wim Hof method. with people with names that are beyond my cultural scope. I don't get out of the house much. But what they found here is that if you do the Wim Hof breathing method, you decrease a lot of inflammatory factors. You do. So some very important ones, TNF alpha, IL-6. Honestly, these are the two most important ones. They actually go way down, way different, which is pretty fantastic just from a breathing exercise. Here, this is not including the put yourself in some, you know, ice water or whatever happens there. So it has a pretty big impact in that sense. So the breathing has some good things, right? But of course, when we revisit that, I'm going to talk about some of the less good things, especially in a state of sleep apnea. The second half or component of the Wim Hof method is being cold, cold water immersion, or CWI is what it'll be called in the literature. And it's not really cold water immersion when you're in a shower. It's not. It's you're getting cold water on you. You're not immersed in it. Very big difference. So when they're doing research like this, someone's in a tub, which is different than being in a shower, which hopefully isn't very profound statement for you, but nonetheless, an important thing to recognize. So key findings from this. When you do cold water immersion, it's going to actually increase inflammation immediately thereafter, but then it like dips down. So it's like this boop up and then down. Okay, so a little nuance there, but overall the net effect is it goes down. Number two, stress levels will go down as well. And in this one, they also included, because this is a meta-analysis, so they also did look at some cold showers as a specific one. And this is where they were just asking people, hey, do you do cold showers? Yes or no? Not in an experimental setting. And they found that people who said yes to that had a 29% reduction in calling in sick to work. And overall, cold water immersion improves sleep quality, overall quality of life. So great in all cases, right? We'll see in a moment. Now, I'm not poo-pooing Wim Hof altogether here. In fact, I use Wim Hof in terms of my health journey after I made a lot of progress with the sleep apnea stuff. Because when I was dealing with sleep apnea and I tried Wim Hof breathing, didn't really have the intended effect I was looking for. So I personally really do like this stuff. And just a quick story here. So this is Bar Harbor, Maine. And stick with me. This is going to be worth it. And this has one like a huge tide change. So this is low tide on the left. This is high tide on the right. As you can see on the left, there's like a land bridge to this island over there. And during high tide, it goes away. And this water is cold year round. Like in the summer, it'll be like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So, a couple of years after my sleep apnea escapade, family vacation. And if you've ever been in Maine in like July, like the sun rises at like 4:30 a.m. It's nuts. So I had to find things to do and really in the cold exposure at the time. And here's me in the water a little bit, not too deep because I don't want to get swept away or anything like that. But then I would go like swim over here and people would ask me, like, what are you doing? And I really don't like talking to people, which may be surprising, but honestly, if I'm on YouTube, you can't talk back to me. I guess you can do comments, but we can't really dialogue. And I would just pretend I was from like Sweden and be like, "Oh, yes, the cold, good." That's my Swedish American English accent. Nonetheless, I love the cold. It's great. However, there's one huge, well, it's a huge problem. It's not a small problem. Two things. There's a huge difference between fixing and optimizing. So over here, I was in like the optimizing phase of my health journey. I wasn't really fixing a whole lot, just looking to get better. And this coincides with there's a big difference between the disease state of sleep apnea and being generally healthy and good because different physiological states demand different things. So that's why it's important to get to the bottom of how Wim Hof and sleep apnea connect because then you can make better modifications. So one of the biggest things that we mentioned here with these two is this connection around these oxygen gases. So there's the same chart you saw earlier. And here's what happens when you have sleep apnea at night. So same thing, blue is oxygen, red is CO2, and a line down the middle. I know this is a beautiful picture. A line down the middle is when you stop breathing. And effectively, when we think about you have a pause in breathing at night with sleep apnea, and then what happens immediately after that is what we're going to focus in on here. So CO2 levels will rise, oxygen levels will go down. And then you'll have a period over here. If I drew this out, you would start breathing again, and CO2 levels would go down, oxygen would come up again. Now, if it sounds like I just re-explained Wim Hof breathing, That's because they're very similar, these breathing patterns. This isn't an exercise, this is what's happening at night, whether you wanted to or not. These breathing patterns are strikingly pretty close. So let me ask you, if this breathing pattern here is problem, then how is doing this in your spare time during the day going to fix it? It's not. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna make it worse. I'm just saying it's causing a very similar physiological event to happen at the end game here of pause and breathing CO2 up, and you have these big swings in CO2 and these big swings in oxygen. How is that gonna on-wire and fix this pattern? It's not gonna do a great job at it. So we need to understand how CO2 and CO2 drive specifically interact with our breathing and sleep apnea to make some better decisions. So CO2 drive is quite simply, how does your body respond to increases in CO2 due to metabolic activity or even just like a breath hold? So for instance, if someone goes to the top of the stairs and you're instantly out of breath despite just doing 10 steps, you are someone who's very CO2 sensitive. You have a high loop gain as shown here. If you go to the top of the stairs and you're not, you have a good loop gain. You're not over responding to the increase in CO2. Or this is also when we measure the relaxed pause, controlled pause, like whatever you want to call it, basal breath hold test, where you do an inhale and exhale, and then you pause your breathing. If you have to breathe again within like 10 to 20 seconds, that means you have a sensitive system to CO2. Whereas if you can go longer, like 30, 45 seconds, your sensitivity is not like out of whack. It's a good sensitivity. You're not like oversensitive. You're desensitized, if you will. Really just normal. And when someone has these big swings all the time at night, they lose the ability to properly respond. They're always hyperreactive. So the hyperreactivity to CO2 is the real problem of the breathing pattern. So with Wim Hof, you're not really addressing that. And honestly, like, you're fostering it. You're supporting it, if you will. Again, I don't think it's going to cause it if you don't have it, but I don't think it's going to fix it, that CO2 hypersensitivity. So think of it like an oversensitive thermostat. Say we want the AC on, air conditioning, so that if it goes above 72, we want the air conditioner to kick on to cool the air, bring it down to 72. That's a good thermostat. A oversensitive one would be every time it goes to like 72.1, you blast on the AC and it like overpowers it. So you're like working harder than you would have to. That's an oversensitive thermostat or an oversensitive CO2 thermostat in your brain. And this is bad, this overreactivity, this oversensitivity, because this fast, irregular inhale, which you would have if you do those exercises or just by having sleep apnea, this becomes a cycle that a fast, irregular inhale will basically have this suction force to all the soft tissues in your airway. So it'll kind of pull those together and block off your airway. And this happens regardless if you have a small jaw, narrow nose, whatever's going on. It's the same core mechanism of the airway being blocked in the back, right? So if we get this to a slower, steadier inhale, then things stay open. This is when you have a properly responding CO2 thermostat in your brain. And now I know some people may be thinking, hey, that's the main problem with central sleep apnea. It is, and it's also one of the biggest problems with obstructive sleep apnea because your anatomy will dictate how everything works in your body and vice versa to an extent. So it is present in both diseases here. So again, just Wim Hof perpetuates that problem. So we want to desensitize our breathing thermostat. And this is desensitization therapy. I have no idea why this lady wants to particularly conquer her fear of snakes. I don't know. My mom taught me once there's only one kind of good snake. I'm not going to answer that. I'll let you fill in the gap. So that's where we're at. Now we want to talk about what do we want. So in this expertly crafted diagram, if you watch some of my older videos, I do a lot of hand diagrams. Probably why not a lot of people watch those videos. But effectively, I got rid of the oxygen line for clarity. And then the red line is CO2 levels. And then the green line is what we want. So basically with CO2, we want it a little bit higher, just a little bit. But this is the bigger part here. If I were to kind of circle this here, this area. This is a less sensitive thermostat. So instead of having this like big inhale all of a sudden that'll cause CO2 to drop here, we're delaying the inhale and then the inhale slower. So it's this more delayed, not as abrupt drop in CO2 levels. That's what we want because then that is correlated with a slow, steady inhale that prevents that suctioning force from happening, helps keep your airways open. So that's what we want. We want to tolerate higher levels and delay the breathing reflex. And I know it's a lot of science just to say, do some breathing exercises that have prolonged pauses and prolonged exhales, because then that will help reset your CO2 thermometer. So for instance, box breathing is a great one. 4 in, 4 pause, 4 out, 4 pause. That's one way you can do that. You can increase the timing of that. That's the general premise of it. So this will actually start to retrain the CO2 mechanism, whereas Wim Hof does not do that. Okay. Just because there's breathing exercises doesn't mean they all do the same thing. Breathing exercises are a tool for very specific things. Those are things we're trying to always craft for our clients. Like, what's the best tool for you to rewire your brain and help your body health, right? Now, we shouldn't just throw out the baby with the bathwater here. And I guess that was the thing they did back in the day. Otherwise, why would this picture exist? Because there is one huge benefit of the Wim Hof breathing technique for sleep apnea. So it has to do with hypoxia. And this is the main thing, like the death switch, if you will, inside of the cells that causes pretty much all the problems. So when oxygen goes down and goes back up, that's a trigger, but it's not the problem itself. Because when that happens, big swing in oxygen, it will activate hypoxia inducible factor. And then this will cause a whole bunch of problems downstream. Not good. It's not what we want. But if we can modulate hypoxia inducible factor, then things are a lot less problematic. So that's what we want to do. And you actually do this by using the principles of adaptive hypoxia response versus non-adaptive. So we'll skip a lot of the subfactors and subtypes of HIF, hypoxia-inducible factor 1. I guess I kind of alluded to here. There's an alpha and a beta and all this stuff. But to avoid a mind melt over biochemistry to make things simple, the bad hypoxia-inducible factor pathway will be triggered by a non-adaptive hypoxia drop. That's when it's not controlled, it's erratic, it's very different, it's constant. Just like when you stop breathing 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 times per hour. Not good. Not what you want. That's non-adaptive. Just like if you worked out constantly, you just ran all the time, you're not going to become a very good runner because your body does not have the ability to adapt to the stressor. Same thing for those big drops in oxygen that happen at night. Now, there's an adaptive hypoxia where you do things in a controlled manner, like breath holds, and this will actually lead to a change in the HIF pathway where things are actually more resilient to swings in oxygen and there's less damage. So that's what we want. We want the adaptive. And that's what those breath holds do, because when oxygen levels go down like that, it will start to activate this adaptive HIF pathway. So this is known as O2 tables, where, I mean, you're just basically increasing the timing of your breath hold. Now, this is just an example. It's going to look different for you and where you're at, but this is just a general idea of where you don't need to do the Wim Hof huffing and puffing. In fact, it's probably a less efficient way to train hypoxia. But if you do something similar to this, it can improve your response to hypoxia. And how you would see that is if you're tracking your oxygen levels at night. If you have a dip in oxygen, where's my finger? Here it is. If you have a dip in oxygen, like on a graph, oftentimes it will correspond to an increase in heart rate at the same time. That usually means you have a non-adaptive response to hypoxia. Over time, what I see in our clients is even before they fix all the apnea episodes and the desaturations, their heart rate doesn't respond to a big drop in oxygen. And that's largely driven by their becoming more resilient to hypoxia. So that's why it's important there to know that holding your breath is a good idea if done properly. Now, before we dive in, see what I did there? Well, I think we're going to dive in next to the cold part. That's another big part of the Wim Hof method. But my questions to you is, are you finding this valuable? Is this information that's giving you some new insights on what to do? Because if it is, that's good. I guess that means I'm doing my job. And another question is, do you think this would be helpful for other people? Would other people benefit from knowing, hey, these breathing exercises, or maybe, someone's deciding to do Wim Hof or not? Be able to have some good insights for them. So if you agree to any of that, then I think it would be a great recommendation to subscribe to this channel, because that way you get more of this great information, because I cover lots of different topics all related to sleep and sleep apnea. And of course, every time you click subscribe, an angel gets its wings and YouTube is like, hey, let's show this to some more people. So whether you click the button underneath the video here on your phone, tablet, desktop, whatever, or if you got a Roku, you click up, right, click my face, comes up apparently. You click OK, then click subscribe. Super intuitive. I know. I had to look it up because I don't have a Roku remote. Now, this next part's all about the ice, and I guess I want to apologize to Wim because I've been spelling his last name wrong the entire time. So going forward, hopefully it's good. And so it does a lot of great things when you get cold exposure when done correctly. Now, it's not for everyone. It's not. Okay. But it does have some great effects like improving your neurotransmitter function, why people have way better moods when they do cold therapy, or increasing fat oxidation, helping with vasodilation, reducing inflammation. It has a lot of great impact that's been well researched and documented. Now, in this one, what I want to highlight is the autonomic nervous system load. So, I kid you not, this is the design of this study. So, if you see that they decided, hey, let's actually go to Antarctica to do this. And if you read the paper, the plot gets thicker because it's not like they came from like Kansas or something like that. They came from India. And they were like, let's spend a month in Antarctica. Yeah, it says right there, Delhi, for 2 months. I hope they were doing something else besides just being cold. It seems a bit of a roundabout way to study this. Anyway, the point of this is that when someone gets exposed to cold, like they would on like this 7th day here. So they were measured at baseline. This is their nervous system response. And effectively, the higher they are up on this graph, that means the more their fight or flight nervous system is dominating. Okay, so the higher they are, more sympathetic fight or flight nervous system is active in comparison to rest and digest. So it is higher up here. So when they arrive, 7 days into it, it's much, much higher. But over time, it goes down almost to baseline here. And this is going to be statistically pretty much the same here. At home, and then 60 days into Antarctica, things have adapted here. And that's basically the whole premise of this, is that when you go and get exposed to cold, first, it causes a sympathetic response. And then over time, it actually becomes a more balanced, calming property or therapy. Now, we'll revisit this because there's a difference between these two lines I need to discuss. But the whole point is cold therapy, when you first start doing it, stresses out your nervous system, as shown here from Delhi to day 7. This is a big problem because when we talk about things that stress out the body, there's a certain curve here. So we can have a stressor and then we can have a good response. A positive response would be on this side. We could also continue to crank up the stress and then we'll have a negative response on the body. And this is typically, if people have sleep apnea or sleep problems, this is where you will live, especially because sleep apnea is also fundamentally a overactive nervous system disorder. You have this thing known as arousal events, and that's basically every time you wake up at night, your nervous system is going to be activated. And I'm not just talking about consciously waking up and remembering that. Anytime you go from like a deep sleep to a light sleep, which is going to be a lot if you stop breathing, this is happening. And you're constantly revving up your nervous system again and again and again. And if you've ever had palpitations, you have high blood pressure, you wake up, or you have like nightmares, it's because of this overactive nervous system. As shown here, you have all these elevated stress response, leads to insomnia, nightmares, OSA, not very good. So if you do cold therapy on top of this, it is just going to make it worse. And that's often when people happen. They'll get even more stressed out and they'll have more apnea episodes and they'll have worse sleep quality because of adding something that we see as generally good for a general healthy audience, and applying it to a disease state without understanding the physiology underneath the core here. Now, there are some different types of solutions, and this is a really bad chemistry joke and pun. We're just going to move right by it. What you can do is honestly just you could skip out on the cold therapy. You don't need to go into water, even if it's just like outside in some cold air for a bit. Wear one less layer. You can get some of the benefit without revving up your nervous system. So that's skipping it and just less cold. And the last piece is I really don't think standing in a shower doing cold therapy is really appropriate for people with sleep apnea for the reasons I mentioned, but also what I alluded to earlier. So the big difference between these two is that the top line is standing, the bottom line is laying down. Your nervous system is more activated when you stand up. If it wasn't, you would pass out because blood would not go to your head and be maintained there from this vasoconstriction of your arteries to push that blood and keep it in your head so you're conscious and not passing out. So if you add a standing stressor to cold stressor, it's going to be that much more stressful. And if your nervous system is already in overdrive, that's not what we want. So if you are going to go against my advice, you can make cold showers a lot more beneficial, whether it's in a seated position or laying down in a way. Obviously, have some way to breathe, okay? And in fact, don't lay down in your shower. I'm just gonna say that. Don't lay down in your shower. Seated, gonna be better. You lay down in like a tub that's a little bit cold, like still be able to have your head out. That's very good. And what's very bad, don't ever do this. Never do this. Don't do Wim Hof breathing in a body of water. Do not do it. People have died from that. You've been warned. Disclaimer 2.0. I always like to have a little guide for you because we're all adults here, and I don't want you just to have to furiously take notes or recap things of that nature there. And then also, the second thing out of the three doors is a sleep apnea reset protocol workshop that will walk you through even more what we talked about here today at a higher level of what can you do for your breathing to make sure it is as efficient as possible. Really retrain that, and then also address a lot of the muscle inefficiencies that when you have weak floppy muscles goes back to the airway, not good. So we want to address the trigger and the thing that is triggered. That is the breathing and also weak floppy muscles. So we can have slow inhales, good muscles, good open airways, and way better sleep at night. So you want that, go ahead and click the button on the screen here. Now, before we get to item number 3, just how to get all of these here. So for the Wim Hof guide and also the reset protocol, you can find that in the description box. If you can't find the description box because you're on your phone or something, just click the title and then the description box will magically appear. And for the sleep apnea reset protocol workshop, you can find the button somewhere on the screen. Either it was on the video or it's down below, like a little icon there. That's how you find that. All right. And of course, we'll go over door number 3, but just to give you the URL links for either of these. So if you're super into the Wim Hof guide, you want that. And again, extra F, throw in an extra letter there for you here. I'm going to get eaten alive in the comments about that. So you can go to ochnow.com/WIM, WIM. Here's a QR code if you want to scan that. And as many items can pop up on Lucidchart as possible here will. If you want the reset guide, go to ochnow.com/reset. Now, this isn't the third option, but do please subscribe to help us get the message out and you get more great information. And of course, third door here, drum roll, is if you want to learn more about working directly with us. Some people have been asking in the comments, like, do you do consults? Do you have this? Do you have that? I figured I'd just start having a web page that explains what that looks like. So you go to ochnow.com/next, because it's often the next thing for you to do. Got a QR code there as well for you. So that is item number 3. And I guess this is the end, my friends, until next time. So I'm Dylan Peckus. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.